We're getting to the good stuff now. It's chapter 22 of Crimes Against Christmas by New Old Friends.
With my Heather.
And my Ferg. Everyone except Michelle and Turtle and the Duke is dead. Artridge is off to confront old Richtenstan, who he is sure is the killer. Chapter 22. Dun dun dun, denouement.
You can picture the scene, but wait until I've described it. If you go imagining some seedy London nightclub with scar-faced henchmen looming out from the haze of cigarette smoke while half-nude dancers gyrate their nubile young bodies provocatively towards me, you're going to be disappointed. For that matter, now you've conjured that image up, I'm disappointed. I'd far rather be in that scene. But alas, I am a victim of veracity, so picture this scene if you'd be so kind. I found myself back in the kitchen of Richtenstan House. The pile's august owner had positioned himself on a stool at the far end of the worktop. To one side was the large hearth, its stones blackened with decades of fires but now cold, the other wall covered in shelves and cooking accoutrements, and, of course, that hideous, simple white wooden door. It spewed the aura of death into the room, like some kind of morbid radiator. I wasn't surprised the Cove had chosen this room for his big moment, so near to the fruit of his labours. He was lit by candles behind him, throwing dancing shadows over his front. His body was stooped over his food, the blades of his shoulders poking out like bat wings as he sawed away at the meat on his plate. Here was a villain, ripped straight from the pages of a penny dreadful, a morally repugnant monster, but at least one who understands the importance of pairing the right image to the moment. When he opened his mouth to greet me, so perfect was his form, I had to stop myself from letting out a little giggle of delight.
"Ah, Mr. Artridge, I've been expecting you."
I placed my trusty poker upon the thick wooden worktop. It produced a satisfyingly solid thunk. I lifted my chin and raised one eyebrow, this time communicating nothing more than I too understood the power of posing. I was determined to keep my cool throughout our exchange. I'd no doubt the wily trickster would try one last desperate roll of the dice to rid himself of the pernicious thorn in his side, that great detective, Peter Artridge, so I'd need to stay on high alert. "You've been expecting me?" I allowed myself a hollow laugh. "How cliché. I'm surprised I haven't found you stroking your familiar." I punctuated my devastating quip with a touch more brow work, really letting him have the full gamut of my range. Double raise on the right, into a stern frown, then quickly up with the left, and a slight tilt of the head as the right slowly made its way up to finish.
"Familiar? What are you talking about? And what are you doing with your face? Are you having a bloody stroke?"
Either the old boy was unimpressed by my facial gymnastics, or, far more likely, his eyesight was failing him. I ploughed on, adding a little heroic gravel at the back of my throat.
"What do you have to say for yourself, old man?" "What's that?"
He cupped a bony hand around his ear. I swept out the gravel and upped my volume to just below a shout. Not quite how I wanted to play it, but I wasn't going to allow him to lure me any closer. I said, "What do you have to say for yourself, old man?"
"I suppose I should say, well played, sir."
I permitted myself a little smile at his compliment, but kept it tight-lipped and dignified, as befitting the situation, of course.
"But can I ask one question?"
I knew he was going to ask me how I figured out his Machiavellian scheme, and I was happy to have the opportunity to lay out my thinking. I was sure there'd be press interviews to give once the authorities arrived tomorrow, and this would give me a chance to practice my story. Obviously, it would have been better if I'd got to the bottom of it sooner, less murders, you know. But the important thing was that I'd figured it out in the end. There was the slightly unsatisfactory moment with Michelle beating me to the duck whistle calling birds connection, but I felt with a quiet word in her ear I could resolve that. "Ask away," I said, before adding what I felt to be a nice dramatic flavour. "It's over."
"When you explained the order of the murders, it was all bloody impressive. But it still doesn't answer the fundamental question of why."
I don't know why," I conceded. I didn't know why, and my story would be a whole lot more compelling in print if I did, but I was confident I could coax it out of him. I've heard that criminals take great delight in explaining the exact nature of their grievances that have turned them to a life on the other side of the law. I was rather hoping you'd tell me. It was what the Duke said next which gave me my first inkling something might have gone awry in my reading of the situation.
You don't know why?
He flung his cutlery down with as much force as his withered limbs allowed, the silverware bouncing from the wood onto the flagstone floor with a clatter.
You come here to my island, to my home, and you're killing us off one by one according to some sick song, and you don't even have a good bloody reason?
It's only you and I here, Rishton Shan. The jig is up. There's no point trying to keep up the pretense and shift the blame.
I'm not shifting the blame. You are!
This made no sense. I reviewed everything that had led to this moment. It had to be the Duke, didn't it? His passion for chemistry, his hatred of seemingly everyone, and most importantly, he was the only one left who would have had the requisite amount of prior knowledge to plan this. But this was a convincing display. A bloody convincing display, as he would say. Hang on. I tried to calm things down and simplify them. Are you truly saying you're not the killer?
Yes.
Yes, you're the killer, or yes, you're not?
Yes, I'm not the killer.
He took off his soft little fez and ran his hand through what remained of his curly grey hair.
Are you really not the killer?
No! I hollered. All my heroic posing had been for naught, and I was upset.
No, you're not the killer, or no, you're not the killer.
What? It's not me. I'm not the killer, which means it must be... I was going to say Turtle and Michelle, but even in this moment, with no viable alternative, I was still struggling to believe their guilt. Rishton Shan had other ideas, though, and interrupted me.
It must be the bloody priest! Never trust the clergy!
He obviously didn't know, so I brought him up to speed with the fact that Father Vickers could no longer be counted among the suspects or, indeed, the living. In turn, he told me that he'd felt the need to see his daughter and pay his respects, so snuck out of his room to her bedside. As he left her room, he spotted Butler's body at the bottom of the service staircase. With the vision of his only child's still cooling corpse fresh in his mind, apparently he was willing to give up the fight and surrendered himself to his fate.
I reasoned whoever it was running around killing us all would be after me soon enough, and I'd rather go out with a stomach full of my favourite meal.
He paused abruptly. I could see his brain working behind his eyes as he considered something. The eyes relaxed and the machinery stopped whirring. A decision had been reached. He picked up his cutlery from the floor agonizingly slowly and sliced off a hunk of meat which he shoved into his mouth grimly. He began to talk once more as he chewed on with purpose.
Tell me, Artridge, how did Vickers die?
He choked to death on a duck whistle, Your Grace.
Calling birds. Clever.
I'll admit, it hurt how quickly the old man put that together. But what he said next replaced any jealousy with instant intrigue.
So, the killer has got me to do that dirty work after all.
What are you talking about? What dirty work? At this point, I abandoned my station at the other end of the worktop and moved along the central console to join him.
Butler was grasping 5 gold rings. Vickers is calling birds. And just look at what I'm eating. My bloody favourite.
I looked at his plate and saw a deep reddish-brown sauce dotted with lardons, mushrooms, onions, and what was left of a succulent-looking drumstick of chicken. Oh, Duke Rishton, don't tell me that's...
Coq au vin. French bloody hens. No. Yes.
He picked up a mushroom between his thin fingers and brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply.
I can't get a scent from it, but it'll be riddled with arsenic, no doubt. The bugger would have known this would be the meal I'd choose. Well, I might as well enjoy it.
With that, the old boy picked up the drumstick by the bone and tore at it with his teeth. Then he used it to beckon me even closer and explained to me exactly what he thought had happened this Christmas on the Isle of Rishton Shan, how and by whom. Then he poured himself a large glass of red wine and bade me leave him to die in peace. I left the kitchen by the back route, where once I'd reunited Turtle and Michelle. It led out to the gardens and around a little path to the bench in the orchard. The evening was closing in. The light was fading and it had started to snow lightly. Tiny flecks of ice floating gently through the air like sprites. In other circumstances, this would have been a perfectly magical evening to close out Christmas Day, But all I could think about was the fervent hope it'd stay light and not settle and pose problems for the boat tomorrow morning. Through the drifting flakes, I could see Michelle sat upon the bench and just about make out Turtle in the distance, the pale blue of his jacket highlighted in the gloaming. When she saw me, Michelle stood up abruptly and waved for me to stop.
Where's the Duke?
She asked it in a whisper, but managed to impart enough volume for her words to carry across the distance between us. I replied in kind, feeling a little bit like one of the conspirators in an amateur production of Julius Caesar, telling her where I'd found the old man and how I'd left him.
What was the meal?
She whisper shouted.
Cock o' van!
French hens. It makes sense. That means he must be next.
She gestured with a backward nod towards the shadowy form of Turtle, who was still stood a little way off and hadn't acknowledged my arrival at all. Michelle had found the scarf and wrapped it around herself, but from what I could make out at a distance, Turtle had made no such provision.
Yes, Terry Turtle Dove, of course.
I raised my voice louder.
Don't be scared, Turtle. We'll protect you.
Don't distract him, he's busy.
Busy doing what?
From the moment she'd sent me off to fetch the Duke, I knew Michelle had figured something out that she wasn't telling me. I just wondered if it was the same thing that old Richenshan had confided in me before I'd quit the kitchen, leaving him to his final meal.
You'll see soon enough. You just have to trust me, Mr. Artridge. Can you do that?
Even in the gathering darkness, I could still see the fortitude in her eyes, 2 sparkling gemstones set in her pretty face. What light there still was reflected off the snowflakes, giving her an ethereal halo. I wondered if young Mr. Dove had any concept of quite how lucky he was to have attracted such a beautiful and quick-witted mate. I'd trusted her this far, and the old man's final words hadn't made me trust her any less. But if she shared the thinking of Richenshan, she was taking some risk being out here in the relative open like this. The trees provided some cover, but the killer would be sure to spot us soon enough. I told her my concerns as quietly as the gap between us would allow.
Like I said,
She sat down on the edge of the bench with her hands upon her knees.
you're just going to have to trust me.
But Brenda and the boat will be back tomorrow. Couldn't we just hide out until then? There was a slightly unbecoming tremor in my voice, which I think it's best to put down to the chill that accompanied the snow falling from the night sky. In any case, I still had my poker and would back myself mano a mano against anyone I'd met on this island, just so long as I could see them coming, which is exactly why I didn't like being out here as exposed as I was.
Artridge, you're going to get through this. I need you to be brave.
Her glistening eyes twinkled at me.
Heroic, even.
She certainly knew her mark. Those 3 syllables echoed in my head. Heroic. Yes, I could be heroic, I thought to myself. I lowered myself into a crouch and drew back my poker, ready to swipe at anything or anyone who revealed themselves. So it was particularly galling when a voice from behind me caused an involuntary spasm of my limbs, sending me into the air and my poker to the ground. As I landed, I fear I may have heard a shriek echoing back off the trees.
Well, well, well. What is going on that island?
Find out tomorrow. It's really close to Christmas now, so do stay as safe as you can over the period.
Look after yourselves and look after others. See you soon.